All right, so we are B'Shar Tova. We're moving on to siman Lamed Gimel, which deals with certain things, wear and tear on the tefillin, what makes the tefillin pasul, when are they still kasher, what things you can fix, what you can't fix. So the first two seifim, basically what happened here, there is a machloket between Rashi and Rambam. What the Gemara is talking about is the Gemara talking about that the inner batim of the tefillin shel Rosh got ripped, which is how Rashi understood the Gemara, and the Rambam understood the Gemara as referring to the tfirot of the tefillin, where we sew the tefillin with the gidim, that got torn. And there's also a machloket girsaot between Rashi on one hand and the Rashi and the Rosh on one hand, and the Rif and the Rambam on the other hand. The Gemara, as we'll see, makes the distinction between whether the tefillin are new or old, and there's a machloket whether which one is better. It's better if it's new, or it's actually better if it's old. And basically, the Shulchan Aruch and the Mefashim, they paskin like both explanations of the Gemara, and basically the Chumrah primarily, like not all the shitot in the Rishonim, but like at least the two major shitot in the Rishonim. Okay, so that's just a brief introduction. Hopefully, it will help us understand what's going on here. So let's just go straight to the Shulchan Aruch. So the Mechaber says here in siman Lamed Gimel, im nitkalkel, again, so Sif Aleph is the understanding of Rashi of the Gemara, and Sif Bet, as we'll see, that's why it's talking about the leather getting torn, and Sif Bet is the Rambam's understanding of the Gemara, which is referring to the tfirot, the stitches of the tefillin getting torn. So the Mechaber says in Sif Aleph, im nitkalkel or shel shnei batim mibatei harosh, ze etzel ze. In other words, so you have 4 batim in the tefillin shel Rosh, which are essentially separated by, you have the 2 outer mechitzot of the bait and 3 inner mechitzot, which create the 4 air spaces of the batim shel Rosh. So if the or of the inner batim, if it was 2, one next to each other that got ripped, im tefillin yeshanim sulim. ואם הם חדשים, כשרים, כל זמן שאור מושב הבתים קיים. So if the tefillin are old, then it's pasul. But if they're new, then it's kasher as long as the leather upon which the batim are sitting on is existing. And let me just keep reading in the Mechaber, and then I'll go back to the Ramah. ואלו הם חדשים, how do I know what's considered new and what's considered old? כל הזמן שאם היו מושכים אותם ברצועות, הבית מתפשט ונפתח, נקרא חדש, ואם אינו נפתח, נקרא ישן. So, if when you pull on it with the רצועות, it sort of expands and opens up, that's considered new. If it's not, that's considered old. ואם נתקלקלו שניים זה שלא כנגד זה, ראשון ושלישי כשרים אפילו אם ישנים. ואם נתקלקלו ג' בתים בכל עניין פסולים. Okay, so let's try to make sense out of all of this. So if all 3 batim, in other words, all 3 of these inner mechitzot get ruined, then it doesn't matter if it's new or old, it's always pasul. If it's 2, but it's the 2 not next to each other, in other words, it's the first mechitza and then the third mechitza, that's also kasher, whether it's new or old. If it's 2 that are one next to each other, that's when we have the distinction between new and old. And according to the Mechaber, if it's new, it's better. If it's old, it's worse. In other words, if it's new, then it's kasher. If it's the 2 batim, one not next to the other. If it's old, then it's pasul. What's the logic in making the distinction between new and old, according to the Mechaber? The logic is simple. If it's new, then it should be strong. So even if 2 got torn, it doesn't mean that the others will get torn and it's still going to last, the separation. However, if it's old, then we see it's already breaking down. And then even if only 2 are torn, we say, the tefillin have deteriorated, they're not in good shape anymore, and it's pasul. Okay. Now here, the Ramah, so basically the Mechaber here, even though this is the Rashi's understanding of the Gemara, he's following the Shita of the Rif and the Rambam that new is better than old. Okay, However, Rashi here, the Rama here also quotes the sheet of Rashi. He says, "Gam habatim tzrichim liot kayamim, ela shenikre'u k'tzat." In other words, we're talking about the case where the batim still exist, but it's just that they're a little bit torn. And he says, "V'yesh orim lehefech be'ishenim ksherim u'bechadashim psulim, v'nireh li yesh leachmir lifsol b'shnehem." In other words, here he quotes the sheet of Rashi in the Rosh that it's actually the reverse. That if it's old, it's better than if it's new. What's the logic of this? According to Rashi, the way Rashi explains the Gemara is that if it's new and it still got torn, how could that be? It's new, it's brand new. It must be that there's something wrong with the leather. If it's old, then we realize it's due to the fact, some wear and tear. But after the fact that it's new and nevertheless it got torn means that there's sort of an inherent problem in the leather. Something's not okay here, and that actually makes it worse. Okay? So the Rama says, Lemaisa, to be machmir on both. So bottom line, we don't really need to check whether it's new or old. If two of the batim will be torn, and again, they're next to each other, then the tefillin will be pasud. In other words, so if it's 3, for sure. If it's 2, then if they're next to each other, it's pasud. If they're not next to each other, in other words, the first and the third, then it's kasher, and we don't make a distinction between old and new because we go to chumrah in both directions. Here, a few points from the Mishnah Berurah. Here, the Mishnah Berurah says, what happens if, so here we're talking about the shadrosh. He says, אבל אם נעשה קרע בבית של יד, פסול לכולי עלמא בכל עניין, אף שהתיתור הקיימת ולא דמי לשדרוש, נשתייר בו עד על כל פנים איזה בתים שלמים. In other words, if it's in the tefillin shel yad that essentially have one bite, then it's pasul, because in yad, when you only have one bite, if you have a tear in that bite, that passes the entire tefillin. As opposed to shedrosh, even if you have a tear in some of the batim, as long as it's only in 2 of them, not 3 of them, then and the other 2 are full, then that makes it better. Okay, here he says that if it's in the tearing is in the if it's in the 2 batim which are next to each other, it could be even that it's on different sides. It will still be pasud. In other words, let's say the tear is on the second bite, but on the right mechitza of the second bite, and there's a tear in the third bite. Doesn't matter whether on the right or on the left. Okay, in other words, even if they're not really facing each other. Okay, again, because imagine you have the batim going like this, and you have here on the right of the second one and on the left side of the third one. So you could say they're really not each other because in between them, there are two. You have the walls of the 2 inner walls of the second and third bite. Nevertheless, that's considered next to each other, and it's pasud. Here he says, קיים היינו התיתור, אבל בבית יוסף פירש לבית שיהיו שלמים מכל הצדדים, דלא מכשירינן אלא מה שנקרא מבפנים בין בית לבית, וזהו גם כמדעת רמה שהיא תיקול ההלכה, וכתב, וגם הבתים צריכים להיות קיימים, שנראו קצת פירוש שוב שנתקראו בין בית לבית, אבל הצדדים צריכים להיות להשלים, אפילו קרע בבית אחד, אם נעשה בחוץ לבד, גם כדי להחמיר. In other words, he says that all the tears that we're talking about, again, as I was saying earlier, it's only on the inner mechitzot of the batim. If it's on the outer, then it's always pasud, even if it's in just one. And here he says, this I'm not sure, I haven't seen exactly an explanation of what's going on here, but he says here, סעיף קטן זין, על כן יש לפסול מה שרגילים הסופרים, שעושים הדלת בתים ונותנים אותם בדפוס, חותמים מן האור בין בית לבית כדי שלא נחבץ ובולטת, ומחפים מקום החטא בפנים כדי שיהיה נראה מבחוץ שלם. In other words, he says apparently the people who made the batim and tefillin had this practice of cutting a bit of the leather. So he says you can't do that. I guess they would cut the leather so that it won't expand out or something like that. Okay. All right, so that's Sif Aleph regarding a tear in the batim. Again, as I said, if it's on the outer part, always pasul. If it's in tefillin shel yad, always pasul. tefillin shel rosh, if it's on the inner ones, 1 is fine. 2 would only be good if they're not next to each other. Like, for example, the first and the third, again, on the inner parts. And if they're 2 next to each other, like the second and third or first and third, that would be pasul. And the 3 always pasul as well. And that's how we go to chumrah, whether it's new or old. Okay, seif bet is now how the Rambam understood the Gemara regarding tefillot, regarding the stitches of the tefillin. So he says here, im nifseku tefillot tefillin. So again, it's everything like we had earlier, 2, 3, old, new, but just now we're applying it to the stitches instead of the or of the batim. So he says here as follows: im nifseku tefillot tefillin, leharambam, im hayu shtei tefillot zo betzad zo, או שנפסקו ג' תפירות אפילו זו שלא כנגד זו. Okay, in other words, if the stitches of the tefillin, according to the Rambam, if it was the 2 tefirot, 1 next to each other, או שנפסקו ג' תפירות אפילו זו שלא כנגד זו, okay, apparently meaning even if they're not next to each other, הרי אלה פסולים. במה דברים אמורים? בישנים, אבל בחדשים, כל זמן שאור מושב הבתים קיים קשרים. Again, so the Mechaber is going לשיטתו that if it's new, it's better. So therefore, if it's 2 tefirot, 1 next to each other, or even 3 tefirot, but they're not next to each other, that's pasul, but only in Yeshanim. And Chadashim, again, since they're new, even if the stitches have torn, we're not concerned that they'll fall apart, because we say that tefillin are still new. Okay, ואלו in חדשים, what is considered new? כאור שאוחזים מקצת האור שנקרא תפרו, ותולים בו התפילין והוא חזק ואינו נפסק. אם אין ראוי לתלות בו אלו נפסק, הרי אלו ישנו. So as long as I hold up the leather at the point where the stitch was torn, and I can hang my tefillin there and it's strong and it won't come apart, then that's considered new. And that's why it's really kasher, even though the stitches have come apart, because we see it still remains together. However, if it will all come apart, then that's considered old. And here the Rama again goes to Chumrah and he says, "Agav yesh omrim, b'chadashim psulim u'b'yishanim ksherim, v'tov lachush l'shtei asvarot k'nireh li." In other words, he says no, it's the reverse. If it's new, it's pasul. If it's old, it's kasher. And again, the logic being that after the fact that it's new, and nevertheless it still got torn apart, shows that there's something wrong here. There's something wrong with the leather, it wasn't put together properly, something's wrong with, it's sort of like if you see a defect in something which is new, that's sort of more cause for concern. So that's the logic of the Rama following Rashi. Okay. Now, what happened? What would be according to the other Chitot? So here it says the Mishnah Berurah, "L'Rambam אבל השאר פוסקים פליגי עלי, ומקילים בכל גבני, בשתי תפירות ובשלושה תפירות ובשתי תפירות, בשלושה תפירות שנפסקו מחמירים. ואפילו תיקון במקום ההפסק לא מהני, דגניו כשניכר התיקון בשלושה מקומות, בין בחדשים או בין בנשנים, צריך לחזור ולתפור מחדש." He says, according to the other poskim, they just simply say that 2 tefirot is fine, doesn't matter if they're next to each other or not, old or new, and 3 tefirot is the chumrah. And he says even you cannot just stitch it in that place, because then it will be recognizable that it's different. It was just patched up. There wasn't the proper stitching, so therefore the way to correct it properly is to take out the entire gidim and then re-sew the tefillin together. Okay. Here he says, במקום הדחק, he says, במקום שאי אפשר למצוא תפילין אחרים ולא לחזור ולתפור תפילין אלו, יש לסמוך על המקילין בפסיקת התפירות, בין בחדשות ובין בישנות, בין בבית תפירות בין בשלוש, אך בשלוש ייזהר שלא יברך עליהן ואין דבור על אחד. So he says, if it's shat adchak, if it's just 2 tefirot, then you can rely on all the Rishonim which disagree with the Rambam. and even make a bracha. If it's already 3 tefillot, then you can't make a bracha. So you put them on without a bracha. Okay, here in the Orach Chaim, he goes at length to explain that there are 2 problems with the tefillot being ripped. One problem is just the fact that the tefillin needs to be stitched together. But there's another problem that we learned, that the tefillot, the stitches, have to create a ribua. They have to create a proper square, because we rule the tefillin need to be square, the tefillot need to be square, the pituah needs to be square, everything needs to be square. So if you're missing 3 tefillot, as he says here, hamimela nitkalkel al ribua, ועל פי רוב יש גם תפירות בכל צד. Okay, in other words, so if, let's say the 3 tefillot are all on one side, again, you have 3 tefillot on each side, so then the ribua, the square, has also been ruined, unless the 3 tefillot are on different sides. But if they're all on one side, then in essence, the ribua has been ruined. So he says that in that case, it's even worse, and you can't make a bracha with tefillin in that case. In other words, there's more reason to claim that tefillin are pasul if the falling apart of the tefillot, now you don't have a ribua created by the tefillah. In other words, as opposed to if 1 or 2 just come out, it could be that one is here, 1 is there, then maybe still the square shape still exists. Okay, let's see seif gimel. Okay, seif gimel now moves on to the ritzuot. Okay. So he says here in seif gimel, all ritzuot, tzarich sheyeh me'or be'ema chaya ve'of ha'tehorim. So first thing, the ritzuot also have to be from or be'ema chaya ve'of tehorim. Okay, this is explicit in the Gemara. I'll show you to you the Gemara in the second Shabbat, about the 4 pages. Right, the Gemara says, "Lo chsheru b'melechet shamayim ela or b'emat Torah bilvad." Lema yilechet al tefillin. So the Gemara says, "Tefillin ve'ed yaktiv b'u leman tiyeh Torat Hashem beficha, min mutar beficha, ela leoran." V'hamar Abaye, in other words, that not just the parshiyot, and also the or of the batim. V'hamar Abaye shin shel tefillin alacham l'Moshe miSinai, ela lekorchan b'saram tufran b'gidan, anam yelacham Moshe miSinai. ודתניא תפילין מרובעות הלכה למשה מסיני לתפות בשרן תפות בגדן אלא לרצועות, ואמר רבי יצחק רצועות שחורות הלכה למשה מסיני, מאידי גמירי שחורות טהורות מגמירי. In other words, we have הלכה למשה מסיני that the רצועות need to be black, but how do we know that they also have to be from אור בהמה טהורה? So that's the חידוש of Rabbi Yosef, that לא הוכשרו במלאכת שמיים, anything which is for מלאכת שמיים, for the sake of a mitzvah, has to be from אור בהמה טהורה בלבד. So therefore the רצועות need to be from אור בהמה טהורה, and they also need to be black. Okay, now here regarding the tefillin being black, there is another Gemara in Masechet Menachot. The Gemara here says as follows: Amar Rabbi Yitzchak, Retzuot shchorot halacha l'Moshe miSinai. So he says it's halacha l'Moshe miSinai that the retzuot need to be black. Meitivei tefillin ein koshrin otan ela b'minan, bein yirukot, bein shchorot, bein levanot. Adumot lo yaseh mipnei gnai v'davar acher. In other words, the tefillin, the ritzuot, in other words, in koshrinota, that's referring to the ritzuot, it must be from the same color that the tefillin themselves are made, that the batim themselves are made of, whether it's green, black, or white. In other words, the bite of the tefillin could be, let's say, white. Okay, maybe some Kabbalists that are wearing full white garments, maybe they'll want to also have to have white tefillin. And the retzuot also can be white. The only color you can't have is red. What's the problem with red? Here Rashi explains, in other words, either it's from his profession that he has a lot of blisters and they became red, or even worse. Okay, I don't know how that would get on his tefillin. In other words, red, it's megune, because people might think that's not the color of the tefillin, but rather it's like some sort of blood that gone on the tefillin. But other colors are fine. אמר רב יהודה, מעשה בתלמידו של רבי עקיבא שהיה קושר תפיליו בלשונות של תכלת ולא אמר לו דבר. Here it wasn't the same color. In other words, he used רצועות of תכלת when the tefillin were not תכלת. אפשר אותו צדיק ראה תלמידו ולא מיכה בו? אמר לו, הן לא ראה אותו, ואם לא ראה אותו, לא היה מניחו. You can't prove from there, he didn't see that that's what he was doing. מעשה בהורקינוס, בנו של רבי אליעזר בן הורקינוס, שהיה כותב שר תפילו בלשונות של ארגמן, ולא אמר לו דבר, אפשר אותו צדיק ראה בנו ולא מיכה בו, אמר לו, הן לא ראה אותו, ואם ראה אותו, לא היה מניחו. In other words, he didn't see that the רצועות and the tefillin were two different colors. Anyway, we see that they don't need to be black, so that's what the Gemara here asks. קטן ימיה, בין ירוקות, בין שחורות, בין לבנות, they can be other colors. לא קשיא, כאן מבפנים, כאן מבחוץ. In other words, and here Rashi explains the tefillin, the ritzuot on the outer part, they need to be black. On the inner part, then they can be from other colors, as long as it's the same color that the tefillin themselves are made of. The Gemara asks, "My gnai vedavar acherika." So what's the gnai if it's red? It's on the inner part, you can't see it. Zimni demitapina. In other words, sometimes it might turn over, then people will see the blood, and then they'll think, something's wrong. Okay? So we see from here, bottom line, that the outer part of the ritzuot needs to be black. However, the batim themselves don't need to be black. And the inner part of the ritzuot facing one's body, they can be from the same color as the batim. Okay, so the Rambam brings this malacha, and the Rambam says, ritzuot shel tefillin, ben shel rosh ben shel yad, pnehem achitzonim shchorim. V'zo halacha leMoshe miSinai. In other words, the outer part needs to be black. אבל אחורי הרצועות, the back part of the רצועות, הואילו מבפנים הם, since they're on the inner part, אם הם ירוקות או לבנות כשרות. אדומות לא יעשה שם את יפך הרצועה וגניו לו, they could be green, white, just not red, ולא יהיה אחורי הרצועה לעולם אלא כעין הקציצה. In other words, but the back part of the רצועה should always be the same color as the קציצה. In other words, the bite of the tefillin. אם ירוקה ירוקים ואם לבנה לבנים. And here's the interesting line in the Rambam. In other words, he says it's more honorable for the tefillin to be fully black, both the k'tzitza, the bite of the tefillin, and retzua kula. In other words, even the back part of the retzuot, the Rambam says it's better if it will be black. Okay? So regarding the batim, as we know, we definitely have our batim black color. The back part of the retzuot, it was not so. In the past, it wasn't customary to have that black. We just have the top part. I don't know if you've seen nowadays, it's become more popular to have ritzuot that are fully black, that they make the black throughout. And then even on the back part of the ritzuot, it's black. And that's good also because of the sheet of the Rambam, that it's better to have the ritzuot fully black. Okay. I don't know, have you seen that? The fully... I think it's become more common. I have them, and
yes, that's usually it.
Okay. I think it's now becoming more the standard. Okay, so says the Mechaber here in Sif Gimel, let's see quickly. He says, "Or Ritzuot, tzarich sheyem or be'ema chaya ve'osa teorim, v'tzarich sheyem me'ubad lishma." This is very interesting. That it needs to be me'ubad lishma. This the Rambam holds that even though the tefillin themselves, we do not need ibud lishma for the Ritzuot, they do need to be tanned in some way. Lishma, again, it's not so clear what the source for this is. I saw in my Rosh Hashiva's Perush in the Yad Pshuta that he claims that it's learned out from the fact that they need to be black, so therefore it must be that something is lishma, some sort of tanning is needed. Here also the Mishnah Berurah says that ashchara gam ken tzarich sheyeh lishma. In other words, both the tanning and the blackening, the coloring of the black has to be done lishma. Ritzuot בין מאור בין מקלף כשרות, הלכה למשה מסיני שיהיו הרצועות שחורות מבחוץ, אבל מצד פנים יעשה באיזה צבע שירצה חוץ מאדום, שלא יאמרו שמידיו חטאתיו נצבו והדיבו. In other words, on the outside they need to be black, from the inside they could be whatever color they want. And he says here in the Mishnah Berurah, he says, רצונו לומר, אם ירצה לצבע אותם, אבל אין מחויב לצבען בשום צמא. It's not that you have to color them, you could just leave them colorless, and that's also כשר. דאף דלהרמב"ם צריך להשחירן גם בפנים, כמו שהבתים השחורים. אין לנו נוהגים בהרמב"ם כזה כמובן בבית יוסף. Again, he says this was the minhag at that time anyway, not to follow the Rambam, and they would simply leave the inner part of the Ritzuah colorless. As I said, nowadays it's become more customary to follow the Rambam and to have it fully black. All right, any questions or comments on this? Right. He says here, if they got old, in other words, if the blackness has faded away, then you need to recolor them. Okay. All right, very good. Shkosh, everyone.
Yep.
See you next time. What happens
so much.
after?
Next week, we can't meet